So it's 2013. I am 29 years old. I have a graduate degree under my belt and feel like I'm a pretty employable person. But I am sitting in a plasma donation center at 6:30 a.m. Not just because I have a couple of other part-time jobs to get to, but because I have calculated that that is the least likely time that I will run into anybody I know. So I sit back in my vinyl seat, reminiscent of the vinyl chairs on all of our elementary school buses, and think about all of the embarrassing memories that go with that. And I think to myself, vinyl seating must always equate humiliation. How did I get here? Oh yeah, I started a nonprofit. So selling your body for grocery money is actually not inherently part of starting a social good company or organization. That was just the route that I took. So come with me on this journey where I'm going to take you through my path as a social entrepreneur, and hopefully you can have some takeaways that will help you be able to literally and figuratively feed yourself while trying to do good in the world. So 9 years ago, I spent the summer in Uganda. I was working for an organization where I was overseeing about 30 American college students doing internships in the local community. And they were working in areas of business, health, education. And while we were there, a woman in the local community would come and wash clothes for our large group. Her name was Eve. Eve was very soft-spoken. She was shy. She was a single mother, and she had been engaged in just sporadic pickup work, so daily labor where her focus was make enough money today that I can buy enough ingredients to make a meal for my children tonight, and often that was their only meal of the day. Her children were not in school. She didn't have money for school fees, and at the time she was living in her pastor's garage. I remember getting to know Eve and others like her and thinking, wow, our lives are so different. And many of these women were my same age. But as time went on and as we built real friendships, I started seeing how much our hearts were the same. The things we cared about, the things we feared, the things we hoped for were very similar. And the one differentiating factor when it really boils down to it was that the geographical location of my birth lent to a life of opportunity and choices that women like Eve did not have. And this really shaped my understanding of poverty, that it's not just a lack of money, but simply a lack of opportunity. So the summer went on, and we got to know many women in this similar situation. And in this small town that we lived in, many women had the economic burden for the home, but there was very little work for women. And so that naturally led to a poverty situation. And so myself and two other friends, we were talking about this and thinking about this and thought, what can we do for this situation? So we put our heads together, and we had seen jewelry made in the local community that was beautiful, and thought simply, okay, we can have women here make jewelry that will sell in the US, and the money will return to support them and their families. Up to this point, aside from this summer, I'd never worked for a nonprofit. I had never taken a class in business or management. And to be real, we had not really done market validation to know if this jewelry would actually sell in the US. At this point, that was kind of superfluous to us, which, pause, it is not superfluous, but we will get into that later. So we started an organization called Musana, which means sunlight in the local language. And our summer wrapped up. We all went home to full-time jobs. So this was kind of a part-time or very much of a side project for a long time. And in the very beginning, I had a very renowned and successful businessman who came to me and said, "You are so stupid for starting this." And this is a real quote. These are the words. He said, you're young, you have no experience, you have no capital. This is stupid. What you should do is, get a good job, make your money, and at the end of your life is when you give back. So this is stupid what you're doing. So those words kind of rung in my head through this, especially these first couple of years where this organization really limped along. But I want to say something about, there is something about being naive that, yes, it can cause you to do stupid things, but also can cause you to jump into things that can turn into something beautiful when you're lucky. So the first couple of years, I remember times where at the end of the month, we'd have a call with us as founders, and we'd say, all right, we have not sold enough jewelry this month, and it is time to pay the artisans. So who's got a few $100s? And so it went on like that for quite a long time. Christmas 2011, we made our biggest sales of the year, and that was exciting. And shortly thereafter, we found out that our accountant in Uganda had actually gotten hold of our debit card, drained our bank account, and took off, and we never saw him again. So this was really devastating. It was devastating because of the breach of trust that we had, and devastating because we were out of money, and our whole goal was to be able to, pay these women for their work, and we had nothing. So we thought, all right, maybe we were stupid, and we're in over our heads. Maybe it's time to close this chapter. Serendipitously, though, at that time, the organization I'd worked for in Uganda previous to this asked if I could go over to Uganda for a month and set up a project for them. And so we said, okay, great. I'll be able to go assess the situation and most likely close this down. And so I showed up in Uganda and was pretty taken aback by the situation that I came upon. I became reacquainted with Eve, who had washed our clothes. And she had been working at Musana for over 2 years. And she was a different person. This woman who was shy, who would hardly look you in the eye when you spoke, was this vivacious force to be reckoned with. The other women at Musana gave her the nickname of Mulalu, which means the crazy one. And she literally, both then and continues today, she is the class clown of Musana. She is teasing everyone, she's the jokester, and if any visitors come to our workshop, she's the first to jump on her feet and sing, "We are happy to receive you, welcome." And she's just a beautiful person. And seeing this, what seems like a change, but it wasn't a change. She's always had a huge personality, but it had been clouded over by the burden of her life situation. And so this was something, seeing this, we thought, okay, there's something special happening here. We can't close this down. So it was a few days before I was supposed to come home after that month, and I changed my flight for 8 months out, called my roommates and said, I'm not coming home. I need to sell my contract. And I actually asked my parents to drive up from St. George to Provo and move me out of my apartment. And I broke up with my boyfriend. So those many months that I had the chance to spend in Uganda were really great for building this foundation. And a few months in, we hired a new artisan named Sevy. And it was her, as was tradition at our workshop, on someone's first day, we would sit in a circle and everybody would introduce themselves. And so when it came around to Sissy, the new girl, she started talking and she started crying. And she was speaking in the local language. And so I didn't know exactly what she was saying. I happened to be sitting next to Eve. And so I said, can you tell me what she's saying? And she described that Sissy was saying that her life had been pretty discouraging for the past few years. Her husband had abandoned her with 2 small children, and to make ends meet, she was working for a company carrying large vats of water for 8 hours a day to and from the well back to this business. And so she was feeling pretty discouraged. And in a very reflective tone, Eve turned to me and said, I remember feeling like that. And then she went over to Sissy and said something, and when she came back, I asked her what she said. And in essence, she said, girl, you have no reason to cry anymore. You're with us. You're gonna be just fine. So December rolls around, it's time to come home. I had spent all my savings, and but came home with this renewed fervor to continue this work. But when I came back, we faced the same challenges. We weren't selling enough jewelry to sustain our program. And so at this point, we started getting smart, and we started applying business principles to our nonprofit, which is something I'd recommend for every nonprofit. And we started, thinking about different ways of marketing, different selling channels. We had a really key team member come on that built a beautiful brand for us to really show our story, and basically we just started. A lot of these things that we were trying, not all of them worked, but we started failing fast and failing often, and that directed us toward what was going to work to sustain us. And we kind of stumbled upon a solution that started really working for us. We had a couple of large companies approach us. They had seen our brand and had seen the stories of our artisans, and they said, hey, we want to buy a large amount of jewelry, and then we want to be able to tell your story and the story of empowerment of these women. And the value for them was they were able to show their customers, their employees, that they're a company that cares. And so this was just this really great even exchange of value for both of us. It worked really well. And at the same time, we started looking at this problem that we had just zeroed in on this small town of Lugazi, Uganda. We started thinking bigger about artisans around the world. Artisan craft actually is the second largest employer of people in the developing world, second only to agriculture. So we're talking about millions of people around the world who are engaged in handcraft that's often been passed down from generation to generation. But unfortunately, this is a very commonly exploited group by middlemen in the country that will buy it for pennies and then sell it in the marketplace that when we're traveling, we usually buy it from. Or exporters who will nickel and dime these artisans down, and then all the value add goes when they sell it abroad. And so these artisan groups have great skill and talent, but have no market connection to be able to that's fair. And so seeing this situation and understanding that companies want what we have, we started a business called Fair Kind that is an umbrella company to our nonprofit. And so Fair Kind is now working with artisan groups like Musana in 10 different countries, sourcing products from leather laptop cases to woven baskets to duffel bags, etc. And with this model of for-profit, nonprofit working together, I'm happy to announce that from our early beginnings with 7 artisans working out of a borrowed garage in 2009, we actually now have over 500 women in Uganda working on an order of over 100,000 bracelets this year for a company here in Utah. So, yeah! So it's been, I'm really grateful that I feel a lot of purpose in my work. And yes, there's been really low lows and high highs throughout it. But I think we all know that working for a cause that's greater than ourselves is really what is the meaning of life and what brings meaning to our lives. And I think being in this sector that I'm in, I often have conversations with people that are saying, I want to start something, or I want to be engaged in something, but I'm not sure where to start. And something that I can say is that I don't think that you need to hunt for a cause. I think the cause will find you. And as we heard before with the speech that you just gave, the cause will find you if you're open to it, through your lived experience, through people that you meet, experiences that you have that open your eyes to situations that are less than fair. The cause will find you through pursuing your passions and through honing in on your gifts and skills. And I actually don't think that we just need to be warm bodies doing random service, but we can think about what do I uniquely have to offer, and that's where we can make the most impact with ourselves. And so once you've identified this cause that you care about, should you start a nonprofit? Maybe. I'm seeing You've done it too. I know if you want to get talked out of doing it, come talk to me after. Just kidding. But there are definitely some things to take into consideration before you consider that. First, do all the research you can. Do your homework. Get to know every organization that's working at all in the cause that you care about. Get to know what they're doing well, what gaps exist, what possible unintended consequences are happening to the beneficiaries. Dive into the research and look into, are there research-based practices that can be implemented? Once you've looked at that, the second question then is, do I need to start something new? Or can I plug into something that already exists? So, if you already have a full-time gig, can I volunteer for this cause, an entity that already exists? Can I work in an organization where I can be an intrapreneur or start something to fill in the gaps that you've seen with this cause? If you're a business owner or have influence in a business, can your business support this cause through in-kind or monetary donations or offering your services? Then at this point, if you come to the conclusion that yes, we need to start something, then the question is nonprofit or for-profit. And this used to actually not even be a question. Traditionally, it was just thought if you're working in the social sector, you're either working for government or a nonprofit. But we are in a very dynamic time where the lines between the sectors are blurring. And we're seeing that, in fact, in a lot of cases, we can do more sustainable and scalable social good through a market-driven approach through a business. So there's this whole scale from traditional nonprofits that are fully funded through grants and donations, and on the other end is a company that has a social cause. And somewhere in the middle is where nonprofit for-profit fusion meets, and as I've kind of described, that's what's happening with the two organizations that I've told you about. And so once you understand what your funding model is going to be, that's where you can understand where on the spectrum you can lie. A couple years ago, I had two college students approach me and they said, hey, we want to pick your brain, we want to start something new, and we met some artisans in Latin America and we want to start something like you did with Musana. So, and then they asked me a really great question. They said, if you could talk to yourself, and at this point it was 7 years ago when you started this, what advice would you have, or how would this conversation go? And I said, honestly, if I really described what the journey was going to be, I probably would have, in doing that, talked myself out of starting it. And they were kind of shocked. But from this vantage point, I'm so glad that I did. But if I would have known, I wouldn't have had the guts to do it, I think. And so I'm glad for this journey. I'm glad that we were totally naive when we started, so that we were able to learn and hopefully not hurt too many people along the way as we were learning. But throughout this whole journey, it's been a long one. There have been really poignant moments that have kind of been my guiding post to continue. And to wrap up, I'm just going to tell you one more experience that has been one of those for me. So a few years ago, we had hired on a whole group of new women to work at Musana. And most of them had never had a paycheck before. They were just doing daily labor. And so they were going to receive, after their first 2 weeks of work, a paycheck, which was in the form of an envelope with their name on it with cash inside. And so we were passing out these envelopes, and they just started cheering. They were just hooping and hollering, excited, and they started it in unison chanting something in the local language. And I, again, not knowing what they were saying, I asked, what is it? What are they saying? And this line that they were chanting has been a great why for me personally, but I think this really is indicative of why people in the developing world are working so hard. And this chant that they were saying was this: today our children will drink milk. Thank you.